All right. Well, it's 4:02, and we want to get this thing going, so we're gonna get started. First of all, thank you everybody for joining us today. My name is Noah Lopez, and we also have Jack Rice and Katie Roberti. Jack and I work on a program called the Rancher Technical Assistance Program, RTAP, and RTAP has been around for a little over 4 years, and it helps California ranchers navigate complex regulatory and environmental issues. The program is funded by the California Cattle Council, and it's provided by the California Cattlemen's Foundation. And so we wanted to do this stock pond workshop because we get a lot of questions about stock ponds, and we have over the course of the last 4 years. And we thought it could be a good time to kind of lay some basic information out in a workshop and allow people a chance to kind of ask questions and move on from there. This is going to be a really quick overview of stock ponds and the regulatory compliance process for stock ponds. And so we're going to definitely leave out certain aspects, and we would encourage you to reach out to us further if you want to dive into some more of these nuanced issues. But in this presentation, we're going to cover when a water right is required, the process for obtaining a stock pond registration, CDFW permitting, and annual reporting. Hopefully that'll take about 20 minutes, and at the end we'll open it up to questions and kind of stick around for a while to answer any questions. If people have to drop off, no worries, we can be reached by email and by phone, and that information is available online, and we'll have it also in the final slide. So with that, I think we're going to get started. Jack's going to kick us off talking about water rights.
Thank you, Noah. Jack Rice, colleague of Noah, and work on water issues for a number of years. So stock ponds and water rights. What we talk about this section really because a lot of people will look at a stock pond and not come to mind that a water right is required for it. Some do, but many don't. It's just a pond that's been on the landscape. But under California law, any diversion from a water course or any diversion requires a water right. So some key terms to think about there is that a water course is really probably not what many of us might think. It's not necessarily a creek. It can be any swale or channel where water collects and flows, sometimes pretty small, like really small. Any swale, almost any place that you see a stock pond on the landscape and there's a berm or a dam that's collecting water, most of those are going to be what the State Water Board and what California law considers to be a channel. So there's the water course part. The word diverting or diversion, it actually means both kind of taking water from a stream or impounding water on the stream. So a stock pond, even if you don't take any water out of the pond later or anything else, it's still impounding water, and that's why it's considered a diversion that needs a water right. There are some really rare instances where there's sheet flow. Basically, you can think of this like if you have a big flat field and you dig a hole in the middle of it and the water, the rain that falls straight down goes into that and there's no creek running into it or anything. Sometimes those are not considered diversion because there's no water course. And so those may be what they call non-jurisdictional ponds, but that's a pretty rare circumstance. So all these the reason the stock pond needs a water right is because generally it's a diversion. So what kind of water right are we talking about? Obviously, this is a really complex area of law, and there's a lot to it, but we're just going to hone in on really the stock pond component, particularly if you have a stock pond that you don't have a registration for right now. And the way this works, the way these fit in with our water rights system in California is that you've got your riparian rights. Those are if you're next to a creek or whatever, a river, you can use your fair share of the natural flow, so you have to share that with others, landowners, and you can use that on the land that is adjoining the stream. But stock ponds don't really fit in that category because you can't store riparian water. So we're in the appropriative water rights category, so that you have stock riparian and then you have appropriative, where you're typically an appropriative right is you're moving it in place or in time, and it has a priority date. This is where you hear of pre-14 or pre-1914 water rights or adjudicated rights, so that you have that category. But any diversion that occurs or starts after 1914 has to go through the State Water Resources Control Board, and it gets a license or a registration. And that stock ponds fall into the registration category for the most part. There's some exceptions, but for what our purposes, most stock ponds, they're going to be in the registration, what they call a livestock stock pond registration. And I think, just to recap a couple of issues, it's still a diversion. Even if you just store the water in the pond and you don't really take any out for another use, it's still considered a diversion. Remember that water courses are really broadly defined to be pretty much anywhere where water collects and flows together. And even if you've had an old pond that has been on the landscape longer than you can remember, if that pond, unless you can demonstrate that pond was there before 1914, it's going to need a registration, which it may already have, but in many cases they don't. And Noah's going to talk about that stock pond registration part.
Thanks, Jack. So we've established that most stock ponds require a water right, and we're going to focus on a specific type of appropriative right known as a livestock stock pond use registration. That name is a little bit redundant, livestock stock pond, but a lot of times it's just referred to as stock pond registrations or registrations. We should note that for the purposes of water rights, stock pond has a very narrow and specific definition. Water Code 1228.1 defines the term livestock stock pond, and it says that livestock stock pond means a water impoundment structure constructed for livestock watering, not to exceed a direct diversion of 4,500 gallons per day or diversion to storage of 10 acre feet per year. And so I'm going to finish the definition. 10 acre feet per year, as that use is defined by the board and including impoundment for incidental aesthetic, fire protection, recreational, or fish and wildlife purposes. And so what this is saying is that livestock stock pond or stock pond, when in talking in the terms of water rights, means a pond less than 10 acre feet per year of diversion annually, and primary use has to be stock watering, though it can have these other incidental uses, aesthetic uses, fire protection, recreational, etc. Stock pond registrations have several benefits when compared to a general appropriative water right license. What we're pointing out here is that there's kind of different types of appropriative rights, and there's this registration, and then there's a permit and license program as well. And the registration, stock pond registrations, have some benefits. The primary benefit is going to be the cost. A stock pond registration has a much lower cost to obtain and to maintain than a permit or a license. And the main reason for this is that it's a much less complex burden for the application. A regular appropriative or a standard appropriative license is going to require something called a water availability analysis and other environmental study, whereas a stock pond registration has a very light application. You just provide some information and the registration can be issued, and we're going to talk about that more later. A few things to note about stock pond registrations. Like I said before, the primary use has to be stock watering, though you can have these other incidental uses, fish and wildlife, fire protection, recreation, etc. The primary restriction of a stock pond registration is that the diversion has to be less than 10 acre feet annually. And so generally that means that the pond size has to be less than 10 acre feet, though not always. You can imagine a scenario where you have a pond that is actually larger than 10 acre feet, but that diversion into it each year is less than 10 acre feet. You can look at and determine the size of a pond pretty easily using satellite imagery and kind of a simple estimation of depth and slope, and that's something we can help with, but the Water Board provides a calculation that can be used to determine the size of a pond. Something else about stock pond registrations is that you can add multiple ponds to one registration, as long as the total diversion amount for that registration does not exceed 10 acre feet annually. They also have a limit of 1 pond per 50 acres per registration. And again, this can save on both cost initially and annually, because you can group multiple ponds onto one registration and only pay one initial filing cost and one annual fee. Those fees are put there on the slide, but you can see the $250 initial filing fee is followed by a $100 annual fee that's assessed every year. So the key issues to recap here: stock pond registrations, or I should say stock ponds have a defined meaning when talking in water rights. It means a pond that's less than 10 acre feet annual in diversion and used primarily for stock watering. So the application process for Stockpond registration. How do you obtain one of these registrations? You submit an application to the SWRCB, and previously this was done using either paper or a PDF application you emailed in. Starting just last week, or really starting this summer, this can now be done online through the board's new Cal Waters program. That's the online platform that's replacing their prior platform, eRIMS. Some of you on the call may be familiar with eRIMS. That's where you did your annual reporting. That's gone now, and there's this new program, and we'll talk more about that. And if you're interested in learning about it, please reach out to us. But the Stockpond registration can be done now through Cal Waters, or it can still be done using this PDF application. Once the application, or in order to submit the application, you have to provide some kind of basic information. The first is information about who owns the water right, or who is applying for the water right. Then information about the water right, so diversion amount, source of the water, etc. There's some mapping that's required. This used to be kind of onerous because the applicant had to kind of go out and figure out how to do the mapping themselves, comply with the mapping requirements. Now that can all be done through Cal Waters, so it's becoming a little bit easier. And then the photographs of the pond. There's some other basic information that's included in there, but you put together this packet and you submit it to the State Water Resources Control Board. Once submitted, the board will review the application for completeness, and if complete, they're going to notify the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're going to talk more about this later, but CDFW, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, has 90 days to respond to this notification, and they can impose conditions on the application. If CDFW doesn't respond, or after that 90-day period, the State Water Board is going to publish the registration notice online, a public publishing of the registration, and there's a chance for protest. Extremely unlikely for a Stockpond registration, but there's a chance for protest in another 90-day period. If there's no protest after that period, the registration can be issued. The State Water Board can issue your Stockpond registration. I will note that in our experience, having done this through RTAP or helped folks with this through RTAP, it's an extremely slow processing time for registrations, well over a year, and that may be getting sped up a little bit with the new Cal Waters platform. It might make it easier for some of these registrations to be processed, but don't expect a registration after 180 days. It is likely going to be a long time. So that's an overview of the application process. This in particular is something RTAP can help with, and we've done that for quite a number of folks. If you would like to learn more about it, please reach out to us. So I mentioned that CDFW notification, and now Jack is going to talk a little bit more about that and why that occurs.
One area of this process that we always brings up questions is this interaction with California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Stockpond registration process. And generally it works pretty well from our experience, but the understand it can also be helpful to you. So the State Water Board, anytime there something is happening with water rights, including Stockpond registrations, they notify the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to be able, so the CDFW knows and understands what's going on with water rights, stream flows, stream bed activities. So that part of it, that part of the registration process is a point in time at which the Department of Fish and Wildlife can add terms, to the water right itself, or the Stockpond registration. We don't hear of that occurring a lot. In some cases, they do if there's a particular reason they have, if they want you to control bullfrogs or whatever else, that we've heard of that happening. But generally, process has worked out. It's actually much improved from what it was a number of years ago. They kind of figured out a mechanism to make it work better bureaucratically, and that's been an improvement for everyone. There's also a question on the form as you're going through the registration form. It will ask you, have you obtained the lake and stream bed alteration agreement? So lake and streambed alteration agreement or 1600 agreements, they are required, it's essentially you're required to notify the department anytime you alter the bed, bank, or channel of any river or stream. Basically, for the most part, this is when you're doing work in a stream. And one of the reasons that it asks about whether you've notified is because, for example, if this registration is not for an existing pond, but it is for a pond you want to build in the future, well, they would say you would need to get a streambed alteration agreement before you could go work in the water course to construct the dam. Now, we know a lot of these ponds have been on the landscape for many, many years, even if they're not registered. There's some that are out there. And so in that case, you don't know how it'll be handled. It may not be required that you have to get a streambed alteration agreement for a structure already there, but that would probably come up in your interactions with CDFW. They're going to be noticed of the registration regardless through the water rights process. But it is important to know that even if you have an existing dam, stock pond, if there's some work that's supposed to be done on the spillway or whatever else, and it's in that water course, the CDFW will expect to be notified, and potentially you'll be required to obtain a lake and streambed alteration agreement. That process, it's another online process in most cases, and it has fees and some CEQA charges to deal with that as well. But that's how the pieces fit together. CDFW has these two places that they interact. One is they have the ability to comment on the registration itself, and another, depending on the nature of your activities, is that they may require a lake and streambed alteration agreement if you're working in the channel. Good. Go ahead, Noah.
All right. So we've covered the reason behind the need for a water right. We've covered the application process for Stockpond registrations. Jack touched on the CDFW component. Now that you have a registration, now that you have a water right for the pond, we're going to talk about annual reporting. So the California Code of Regulations, Section 931 to 938, require that all diverters in the state record their water diversion and then submit annual use reports. Most of us are familiar with this regulation as SB 88. That was the bill that was ran to create the regulations. But these regulations exist whether or not you actually have a registration or don't. So whether or not your stock pond is registered or not, technically these regulations are required. You're diverting water, and you need to be recording and annually submitting reports. I will note the board is actually in the process of changing these regulations right now. CCF, the foundation, and the association are tracking that and have commented on that. The changes aren't substantial, especially for these small diversions. For most diversions, an actual measurement of the diversion is required. However, for diversions under 10 acre-feet, monthly estimation is allowed. So by definition, all stock ponds are less than 10 acre-feet per year diversions, and so they're all able to be estimated monthly. You don't need to actually be measuring the diversion. The reports are due every February 1st, and they account for the previous water year. So that's October 1st through September 30th of the previous year. Again, these reports are going to be filed online through the new Cal Waters program. Previously, they were filed through eRIMS. eRIMS has just gone down, so this will be the first year that reports are filed online through Cal Waters. Failure to report can result in fines and penalties. And starting last year, these fines can automatically be assessed with your water rights fee. And that's what that table in the slide is showing. The only row of relevance here is the first row, but you can see that 31 to 61 day late reporting can result in a 25% of the annual fee. So for a stock pond, an annual fee is $100. If you fail to report within the first 31 to 60 days, that fee now becomes $125, and it goes all the way up to $150 if you're over 90 days late. In addition to these automatic penalties, there's just penalties in the reg for failing to report or failing to comply. So the key takeaways here, along with the water right, or along with needing a water right, you also are required to report whether or not you have a water right. Obviously, if you don't have a water right, the board may not know that you have a diversion, and so they may not be enforcing that. But you're required under this regulation to report annually. It's pretty simple for stock ponds because they're allowed to estimate. So you can estimate the diversion and do that annual reporting. And RTAP can help again with that annual reporting. That's something we've done a lot of, and certainly with the new Cal Waters platform, we anticipate folks will be reaching out to have us help kind of navigate that new platform and reporting requirement. So why now? Why register your stock ponds at all? We hear this all the time. It's probably one of the most common questions we get. Jack alluded to, ponds that have been on the landscape for as long as anybody can remember, and no one's ever had a problem. The water board's never come knocking on your door. Registration seems kind of like a hassle. As simple as it is, more stuff to fill out, and it has its associated costs. There's an annual ongoing cost. Why seek a water right now? I guess first, there's fines, right? Unlicensed diversions in the state of California are subject to fines. The state board can fine diverters $500 a day per diversion. There's a process to get there, but that's a pretty steep fine if you got all the way there. And that actually goes up to $1,000 per day in periods of drought. So there's a liability with fines and penalties. But the real reason to begin thinking about this now, at least in our opinion, is advancements in technology. I'll play that video again. Satellite imagery means that there's really no hiding. You can see this as imagery starting in, I believe, in the 80s and going all the way to 2023. And if you were so inclined, or if the board was so inclined to pay for imagery, there's imagery for every day of the year for all of California. Very high resolution imagery. So it's possible to see diversion amounts and diversions. You can't really hide them like you used to be able to, or like they just used to be. That combined with the new Cal Waters program and this new, what's called a geospatial information system, GIS, some of you may have heard that term, but basically a computerized mapping system that allows the placement of water rights on specific points in a geospatial system, means that it may become easier for enforcement and detection of ponds without associated water rights. And you can also imagine that advancements in artificial intelligence may make that so that someone doesn't have to actually scroll through and look at satellite imagery. A system or an artificial intelligence could go through and kind of detect where those may be. We're not aware of any of the enforcement effort or enforcement sweep from the state board, but it does seem like a prudent thing to at least consider whether or not there's a risk with unlicensed ponds or unlicensed diversions, given that technology is advancing so rapidly and that the ability to detect ponds may become easier.
No, one of the questions that we were asked kind of builds on that, Noah, and I'll maybe take a stab at answering it. So the question, has the state of California ever taken any action, whether registered or not, on a stock pond of less than 10 acre feet? Basically, if you have a stock pond that's less than 10 acre feet, have they ever brought an enforcement action on it? So yes, they have. A long time ago, and this is where we're getting that long time ago, I think it's probably 15 years ago, they actually did an enforcement sweep in what was called the AB 2121 area, which is some counties on the north coast, basically from San Francisco to partway through Humboldt County, all those coastal rivers. And they identified every pond that they could see on a map, given that technology, and tried to enforce, or did enforce, to get those ponds either licensed or registered. They had a specific reason for doing that. We have not seen that happen since on that scale, but we have seen instances where, from complaints or other reasons, there have been enforcement actions against small ponds. A second question is groundwater recharge an acceptable usage of stock pond water? So groundwater recharge is actually just converting water from one stored way to another stored way. So you're basically just converting water, saying if you're in a stock pond, for example, you're saying, I'm storing water in a stock pond and then I'm storing water underground. The use of the water is when you either take it out of the stock pond or your cattle drink it, or you pump it out of the ground and put it to a beneficial use. There's a real sticky area of California law that's under a lot of debate right now and causes a lot of confusion. But to suffice it to say is you're really just changing how you're storing it. You're not changing how you're using it.
I'm going to mention here, if you have a question, you can ask it. There's a Q&A in the bottom on Zoom here. There's a section for the Q&A. Please feel free to ask that question, or if you want to ask it via microphone, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. But I want to make sure everyone knows how to ask questions.
Thank you. Spring-fed ponds that are in a rain runoff channel, but springs are not a significance to cause runoff year-round. So this is another area where the answer is imperfect. But basically, if the pond collects any surface water in a channel, you need the stock pond for that part of it. If the spring is just a spring and it doesn't really create a channel or run off the property or anything else, and that's the only flow into that stock pond, then perhaps there's no jurisdictional water there. But if it collects any water out of a channel, it would require a water right. So that's, continue to reach out to us with more details if you have a specific question.
I'll take this question, Robert, on if a stock pond evaporates in July and you still need to report. If there's any diversion at all, you're required to report. And actually, you're required to go through the process of reporting, go in and report regardless if you divert or not. I believe with the new Cal Waters program, it may become, previously you had to fill out a bunch of zeros in the table. There may be a way to say I did not divert this year, and the report will be very simple, just saying I did not divert. But short answer, you're still required to report even if you diverted or didn't divert.
Good. Stock pond is on federal land under your grazing lease. Generally, the owner of the land is obligated to report. In other words, you probably couldn't get in trouble for not reporting. There's a lot of water rights on federal lands, and they are trying to come up to speed. Actually, one of the Cal Waters things is designed specifically for this. There's a little oddness if your cattle are using it, but so are a lot of animals and otherwise. Probably call us on that. We can delve into it more. A licensed pond that otherwise meets the criteria for registration, is it possible or desirable to downgrade the license to a registration? Depending on the circumstances, I don't believe, and we could research this if you want us to, I don't believe you can just downgrade from a license to a registration. What you probably would end up doing is giving up the license and applying for a registration, which would give you a lower priority date, which may or may not have any real effect. That would depend on the circumstances of where the pond's located in the runoff.
The photo that needs to be submitted, we talked about those photos. Stephen asked, does it have to be from the ground, or will a Google Earth photo suffice? It's actually a series of photos showing the water course, showing the pond or the whole diversion, showing the outflow. So it's a series of photos that have to be taken on the ground.
Good. We made it through our questions, and we're 1 minute over. So we can stay on if people have more questions. We're happy to stay on, but thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Jack, do you want to handle Scott's question?
What is the State Water Resources Control Board requirement for springs? So I'm guessing that this question is relative to reporting. And so you don't have to report on the spring. That is, if diversion is less than 25 acre feet and the spring does not flow off the property, the water from the spring does not flow off the property. Otherwise, you do. And insofar as the stock pond contributing to the spring, That one is generally, it's this vague area, but in general, if the pond collects any surface water, you still have to have a registration for that part.
Sally has a great question here. She says, I report on 2 ponds that are certified. I was unaware of annual fees. Is this new? This is not new. We didn't go into this, but there's another type of stock pond water right that was available and is no longer available. That's called a stock pond certificate. The certificate program was opened in the 70s, then it closed, then it was opened again later and closed again in the 90s. It has the same contours as a stock pond registration, meaning it's less than 10 acre feet annually, and it's subject to a lot of the same restrictions and requirements. The only real difference is that they have no annual fees. It was an effort by the board to get a lot of these unregistered stock ponds into compliance, and so they had a certificate that could be obtained, and that program has since closed.
The annual report was due, the June 8th was the end of being able to interact with ERIMS. That wasn't a deadline for water rights. The deadline for water rights was, oh, now I don't, do you remember it? No.
February 1st is the report due date. So if you've reported for last year's water year, it should have been done by February 1st. Is that what you're asking? If you fail to report for last year's water year by February 1st, ERIMS is no longer open, but pretty soon you should be able to do that through Cal Waters. And if you have, if you'd like to figure out how to do that, please reach out to us. They're still kind of getting that system up and running, but we can help you get in touch with the right people and get the count and get that report.
Yeah, actually, if there is somebody that was supposed to report by February and you missed it, and you need to, and it's late from last year, if you're willing, reach out to us, because this would be a way for us to help test the new Cal Water system, and hopefully they would be pretty gracious since you're trying to comply as early as possible. Oh, this is a good one. What would be the best course of action for a pond that has silted in over the years and no longer actually holds water? So this really does come up with quite a bit. Ponds that have lost their capacity. The challenge is that there's always some amount of water that they're typically holding back. And so there'll be a area where, because there's no like lower limit for water rights as far as, hey, I'm only holding, 1,000 gallons or something. That all requires a water right. So you're susceptible to an enforcement action, even if you have a pond that really no longer holds water. Now, if the creek has cut a new channel through the dam and everything else, maybe you're in a different space. But for the most part, you're still going to need to have a water right, even though the capacity is almost non-existent. If you were going to try to clean it out, then that's where you would need the lake and stream bed alteration agreement issue. Somebody wants to repair the dam or spillway on an unregistered pond and on a non-blue line stream, maybe 1 or 3 acre feet. So they ask for our recommendation. So our recommendation will always be that in that case, you would need to notify the Department of Fish and Wildlife about your project, which can be done online. And depending on what your project is and how you've described it, you may or may not be required to get a lake and stream bed alteration agreement to repair the spillway. We would not recommend that you don't notify, primarily because that would be recommending you do something that's inconsistent with the law. So,
will the user and password stay the same for Cal Waters? No, it's a whole new system. Previously, you were issued a password for each water right that you had. Now you're going to have an account with one password, just like you would on your Facebook or Gmail or whatever account, and you'll be able to go in and report on all your water rights.
Well, one thing to note there too is that we've gone through the process of onboarding onto Cal Waters, and while easy, it's much more complicated than what it was historically. And so I think that we're looking to, from seminars to doing in-person meetings to doing one-on-one help, we're looking to really help people get their account set up and go through that process, because it is going to be more difficult than it was historically, even to the point of having like your bank two-factor authentication, so you got to use a phone. Not hard, bit more of a hassle. Water Board didn't have any choice because it's state law. Any other questions?
Going once, going twice.
Well, please reach out to us if you have any questions regarding stock ponds or water rights or whatever. This was very quick. We were trying to be respectful of your time, but it will be, this RTAP's a great service, and it would be great to hear from you to see if we can give you assistance in understanding these issues. So thank you all.
Thanks for being here.